Hey,
Dorothy von Soest is our liaison for Women's International League for Peace and Freedom with the Poor People's Campaign. And with pleasure, I welcome Dorothy.
thank you. And thank you, Reverend Liz. I know that you are in the room and that you have been here for a while. It's an honor and a privilege, and with deep humility, that I introduce the Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis. She's co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival with Reverend William Barber, that has organized the largest coordinated wave of nonviolent civil disobedience in 21st century America, and has since emerged as one of the nation's leading social movement forces. She is also the director of the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice at Union Theological Seminary. A little bit about Liz's background. She received her BA in Urban Studies from the University of Pennsylvania, her Master's of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary, where she was the first William Sloane Coffin Scholar, and her PhD from Union in New Testament and Christian Origins. She has been published in the New York Times, Time Magazine, CNN, The Guardian, Sojourners, The Nation, and many others. In 2018, she gave the Building a Moral Movement TEDtalk at TEDWomen, was named one of the Politico 50 thinkers, doers, and visionaries whose ideas are driving politics, and was also named a Woman of Faith recipient by the Presbyterian Church USA. In 2019, she was a Selma Bridge Award recipient and named one of 11 women shaping the church by Sojourners. In 2020, she was named one of 15 faith leaders to watch by the Center for American Progress. Liz is the author of Always With Us, What Jesus Really Said About the Poor, and co-author of Revive Us Again, Vision and Action in Moral Organizing. She's an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA and teaches at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Liz has agreed to take time for questions after her talk. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And if you could put them in caps, that would help us to spot them easily. And I just want to thank Reverend Liz for speaking with us today and for coming early and hearing more about WILPF as you did it. And I just want to say personally that my goal with you, Reverend Liz, is on June 18th, 2022, I would like to hold your hand and get arrested with you. I doubt that I will be able to have that privilege, so I settle for the privilege today of introducing you. WILPF is proud to stand with you as a mobilizing partner and a woman leader of our time. So I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here with you all. I was raised in a family that was dedicated to doing the work of social justice, and so I was raised amongst many WILPF leaders. And when I went to college, I was mentored by more. And after I graduated, I have continued to be following in the path that WILPF has set forth for our nation and world. And so I thank you all for giving me the opportunity to be with you this evening. Hundreds of people were arrested earlier this month, including some of those gathered with us this evening, outside of the Senate Hart Building, near Capitol Hill, in nonviolent direct action to demand voting rights, an end to the filibuster, and economic rights for all. The action brought together poor and low-wage workers, clergy, and people of conscience, all committed to fighting for a multiracial democracy that works for absolutely everyone. Singing the old coal worker anthem, "Which side are you on?" we claimed the moral authority of a higher law that is being violated by the failures of our political system. Indeed, it's becoming increasingly clear that just as anti-democratic policies are threatening the fabric of this nation, our democracy is in trouble so long as millions are allowed to live in poverty and near poverty conditions, especially when lawmakers and people in power have power to change them. As we've seen in recent months, a series of anti-poverty policies and programs in response to the pandemic have significantly impacted the number of people living below the federal poverty line. These offer a glimpse of what is possible when we center the needs of the poor in public policy, and what is at stake when extremists are smuggled into power and into office through voter suppression, and then go ahead and pass policies that hurt the poor, hurt women, hurt LGBTQ folks, immigrants, and other marginalized peoples the most. The attack on democracy currently playing out in Washington, D.C., and in state legislators like Texas is the worst that the United States has seen since Reconstruction, directly following the Civil War. As folks here, I'm sure, are aware, since January, there have been a wave of voter suppression laws across the country, more than 400 introduced in 49 states, while the Senate, members of both parties, continue to use the filibuster to block the political will of the majority of Americans. At the center of this crisis are poor women, especially poor women of color who are facing increasingly unlivable conditions, none of which will change without a democracy that works for them. History, as we know, circles back again and again in the most wicked of ways, forcing new generations of women to step into the breach to save this democracy. 173 years ago, on July 19th of 1848, hundreds came together in Seneca Falls, New York, to denounce the outrage of second-class citizenship for women. Seneca Falls is often remembered for the issue of suffrage. At the time, though, it was too radical on all of its positions for many. But some, including leading abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who attended the convention, urged women and urged everyone there to make voting rights a key priority, knowing that their struggle was connected to what W.E. Du Bois would later call abolition democracy. Indeed, the demands in Seneca Falls largely echoed the unheralded efforts of Black women stretching back decades. Their rising discontent under the leadership of women like Sojourner Truth. 3 years after Seneca Falls, at a women's convention in Akron, Ohio, Sojourner Truth famously said, "If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right upside again." That's how I feel amongst you all gathered today. That's how I feel in this past month in direct actions in Washington, D.C. and across the nation, carrying the spirit of these women into the streets. We've reminded the nation, and we need to keep on doing it, that unshackling our democracy from voter suppression and procedural rules like the filibuster is inextricably connected to the work of building a nation, building a world where everyone's needs are met. At this critical crossroads, we can't let up on a demand for racial and economic justice. We need to address militarism. We have to save the earth, and we have to raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, which would immediately lift the pay of 32 million people, disproportionately poor women of color. This season of action that the Poor People's Campaign has been organizing, I think, reminds us all of the heroic work that WILPF has done for more than 100 years. The work that so many movement organizations have been doing for decades. And I think it reminds us of the vision and the actions of Reverend Dr. King and the welfare rights movement, and so many who were building a poor people's campaign back more than 50 years ago. It's the same Dr. King who was the keynote speaker at the 50th anniversary gathering of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. In that Poor People's Campaign, leaders proposed uniting and organizing thousands of poor people from all across the country into a force to be reckoned with. Dr. King, in some of his sermons and speeches, including the ones that connected militarism and poverty and racism, suggested that the Achilles heel of these injustices was to unite millions of poor people across race and geography and issue into a campaign to lift the load of poverty. He claimed that the Vietnam War had turned the war on poverty into a skirmish, and that it would take pulling poor people together to stop the war on the poor, to stop this cruel manipulation of the poor. Dr. King was killed as he waged this Poor People's Campaign. When he was assassinated, much of the power and organizing of that campaign was assassinated too. But over the past more than 50 years, poverty has increased in the United States by 60%, at the same time as there's been very little talk about the poor. And so as I come before you this evening, there are 140 million people who are poor or one healthcare crisis, one job loss, one emergency from poverty and economic ruin. There are 15 million families that can't afford water, 32 million workers making less than $15 an hour, and not one town or city or county anywhere in these United States where a full-time worker making minimum wage can afford to even rent a 2-bedroom apartment. Let's consider this, that we live in the richest country in the world if we live in the United States, but that 43.5% of those in the United States are poor or low income. 51% of kids live in food insecure households. And yet the United States spends over $600 billion every year on the military, but less than $185 billion on education and jobs and housing and other basic human needs. Let's have it in our bodies, in our minds, in our souls that pollution has caused millions of deaths this year and last year, and that 4 million people in the United States woke up this morning in homes where they can buy unleaded paint, they can buy unleaded gas, but when they turned on their taps, they're exposed to lead in their water. In such a time as this, people are called to come together. We're called to build a movement of the people, by the people, and for the people. Because indeed, it's a movement led by those most impacted by injustice, involving people from all walks of life, that has been the only thing that has transformed this society for the better. We must get inspiration from history, from the abolitionist movement where slaves and ex-slaves came together, built the Underground Railroad, organized and moralized against slavery. And even when it looked like all hope was lost, were able to press through. I read most mornings some of Frederick Douglass's speech after the Dred Scott decision. He proclaimed something that we've heard from our friends and allies in South Africa fighting apartheid, where they say a dying mule often kicks the hardest. Douglass wrote, "The whole history of progress, of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand, It never did, and it never will. If we ever get free from the oppressions and wrongs heaped upon us, we must pay for their removal. We must do this by labor, by suffering, by sacrifice, and if needs be, by our lives and the lives of others. Now, I share this quote with you all this evening because I think it reminds us of the kind of courage and perseverance and power it will take to nonviolently and yet fundamentally change the system we're living in today. I share it because I believe that this kind of commitment is that which is being demonstrated by leaders from WILPF as we speak. If we're serious about undercutting and addressing and abolishing systemic racism and poverty, ecological devastation, the denial of healthcare, militarism, the war economy, we need a moral analysis, a moral articulation, and moral action. If we are to challenge the false narrative that blames poor people for our problems, pits us all against each other, feeds us a lie of scarcity, that this is as good as it gets, we need a grassroots moral movement that is focused on saving the heart and the soul of our democracy. Over the past 4 years, the Poor People's Campaign has built coordinating committees of poor and dispossessed people, moral leaders, advocates, activists in more than 40 states. We've met with tens of thousands of people and chronicled people's demands for a better society. We've been honored to work alongside WILPF leaders all across the nation and have spent time in places like my home state of Wisconsin, where the safety net has been shredded over the past decade and families are going without heat and electricity, even in cold winters. Orleans County, Alabama, where families have no access to sanitation services, living with raw sewage in their yards, precipitating a healthcare crisis where tropical diseases are showing up in rural South. We spent time in Crossett, Arkansas, where a whole town has been poisoned by a paper, chemical, and plywood plant, and grandparents meet their grandchildren more than 80 miles outside of town to protect those kids from the toxins. We've been in Pacoima, California, where 1 in 4 kids at one particular elementary school, but this is, replicated throughout the county, throughout the state, throughout the country, where 1 in 4 kids are homeless. And Altoona, Pennsylvania, where kids are being taken away from their parents because those families can't afford to pay their water or utility bill or rent. Drawing from this deep engagement, we've developed a moral agenda to eliminate these evils of racism and poverty, ecological devastation, and militarism. We've helped introduce congressional resolutions calling for a third Reconstruction, fully addressing poverty and low wages from the bottom up. We've built the power to compel the sitting president to commit that ending poverty must be more than an aspiration, but become a theory of change. As we do this work and as we do this work together, I'm sure you are familiar with this. Many people tell us we're being far too ambitious, that our demands are politically impossible or they're too expensive. But this is not true. The benefits of lifting from the bottom far outweigh the costs. In fact, it is the cost of continuing immoral policies, continuing misguided priorities that we as a world, as a people, cannot afford. Child poverty costs the United States $1 trillion every year. Unstable housing costs $111 billion a year. Unjust immigration policies keep $123 billion a year out of our GDP. And yet our government subsidizes the low wages that corporations like Walmart and McDonald's and Amazon pay to the tune of $153 billion a year. We need a moral revolution of values that instead places the needs and demands of the poor and the planet at the heart of and center of our international discourse, at the core of our structures and our policies. This will create more jobs, will build up infrastructure, will strengthen an economy, will protect resources for future generations. This will redound to the benefit of all instead of an elite few. As we say and as we sing in our work, when you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. We know this from economics and social science, but also from our sacred texts and traditions. Myself, as a preacher, a biblical scholar, I read in Deuteronomy where it says that if you forgive debts, if you increase programs that lift up the poor and women and children, if you pay your workers a living wage, if you release those who are oppressed and enslaved, if you lend out money knowing you'll never get it paid back, then your whole society will flourish. No, God, some higher power, does not ordain poverty. The poor will only be with us as long as we are disobedient to creation. Poverty is a people's creation. It is the creation of immoral budgets. It is a creation of unjust policies, unjust structures. And we can choose as a people, as a world, as an international league to end it. It's immoral for people to profit from moms having their kids taken away. It's immoral to have the beauty of, to have a world of beauty and abundance, but not have folks with access to water or housing or healthcare. We have the resources to clothe, to house, to educate, to care for everyone in this entire world, and to do it in a sustainable way. And so the question always is, how do we get this done? So this evening, in the midst of this powerful Congress, I want to talk about the power of poor women, the power of poor people, persistently fighting and engaging in nonviolent moral fusion direct action. I want to talk about how people are coming together across all the lines that divide us, building a fusion movement and leading us to a more just society. I want to tell you a little bit about the power of leaders like Marion Cramer, a woman who's getting up there in years, but who has put time and time again her body in front of trucks, being sent out to cut thousands of those in Detroit from running water, and got arrested insisting that no one should be denied water anywhere in this world, who teamed up with lawyers and researchers and activists and pastors, proposed a water affordability plan, got it passed and replicated in towns and cities across the country. I want to tell you about a leader that's inspired me, like Callie Greer, whose daughter Venus died in her arms because she did not have health care insurance, but who has claimed, who has promised, who has pledged that her daughter will not have died in vain, but she will fight and organize and mobilize until every person in this world has the health care they need, not just to survive, but to thrive. There are powerful folk coming together, being led by those most impacted. I could tell you about low-wage workers with the Fight for 15 who have won increased wages for millions in the country, or families in Kentucky who are entering creatively, nonviolently the State House. Even though they've been banned from it, they've delivered toothbrushes to elected officials, stopped attaching work requirements to Medicaid and to dental care and vision plans. I could tell you about homeless white millennials in Washington State who are entering into the prisons there, They have the highest incarceration rate for non-criminal offenses. They're making connections with young people all across cities and towns across the country, organizing young people in the jails in Aberdeen and Westport, preventing white supremacists from recruiting these young people into racist organizations. This is what it takes. This is what will revive us again, to build up a moral revolution of values, radically reconstruct society from the bottom up. It will take the leadership of the poor. It will take the leadership of us all. We're living in the midst of what we call a Kairos moment, a time of great change and transformation when the old ways of society are dying, but new ones, new movements are being born. We know that there's an emergency going on. We need brigades of ambulance drivers willing to nonviolently disrupt the existing order. We're living in a time when the sick and uninsured are saying to leaders of faith communities and saying to our politicians, if you choose, you can heal me. And so, indeed, we must. Brian Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative has a powerful quote that I want to share with you all today. Perhaps you've heard it. He often talks that the opposite of poverty is not wealth, it's justice. So it becomes the question, how do we achieve justice? We organize, we disrupt, we educate, we sing, we protest, we refuse to bow to violence and war and oppression. We look back and we see that in every generation, the world has needed a moral fusion movement where people must come together through deepest religious and constitutional moral values to build an agenda, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. This moral fusion creates a powerful platform for moral articulation to speak out against the flaws of these United States that threaten the soul of this nation and of this world as a belly in the beast. This articulation insists on an agenda that there are many issues that are not about Democrat versus Republican, this little group over this little group, but about the core, that which is central to the survival of the planet and of the people. A moral agenda calling for ideas such as healthcare for everyone with no denial for pre-existing conditions, living wages, guaranteed income for everyone. An agenda that calls us to ensure labor rights and equal pay for equal work and for affordable housing, an end to warmongering, an end to mass incarceration, clean water and air, equality in education by guaranteeing that every child receives a high quality, well-funded, diverse public education with access to free colleges and universities in the United States and across the world. But of course, just articulating our agenda, our vision is not enough. We need moral activism. We're required to not just dissent, but to disrupt that which is disruptive. Not with hate, no, but with revolutionary love. We must love this country, this world enough to take a knee and call this nation to a knee of repentance. We must love these yet to be United States enough to show that the same states that attack voting rights are also high poverty states, electing politicians who then pass policies that hurt people from all walks of life. We must love this democracy enough to go to jail in nonviolent civil disobedience for it, to organize in the streets for it, to sue in the courts for it, and to register everybody we know at the ballot box for it. So I'm here this evening to invite you all to keep building this moral uprising, to have the belief, the faith that we can take action together and be a new and unsettling force, to know that we are powerful and we're here. I'm here this evening because I know we must say and cry out that somebody is hurting our people. It's gone on for far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. We can sing out together, everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail because everybody's got a right to live. So I want to close us out before we get into some more conversation with one more quote from Dr. King. He talks about, there comes a time when a moral person can't obey a law which their conscience tells them is unjust. And I tell you this morning, my friends, that history has moved on. And great moments have often come forth because there were those individuals in every age, in every generation, who were willing to say, I will be obedient to a higher law. Never forget that everything that Hitler did in Germany was legal. It was legal to do everything that Hitler did to the Jews. It was a law in Germany that Hitler issued himself that it was wrong. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. But I tell you, if I had lived in Hitler's Germany with my attitude, I would have openly broken that law. I would have practiced civil disobedience. And so it is important to see that there are times when a man-made law is out of harmony with the moral law of the universe. There are times when human law is out of harmony with eternal and divine laws. And when that happens, you have an obligation to break it. And I'm happy that in breaking it, I have some good company. I have Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. I have Jesus and Socrates. And I have all of you who refused to bow. So WILPF, at this powerful conference, I want to thank everyone here for continuing to refuse to bow. We must keep it up, and I know we will. So thank you, and let's have a conversation.
Thank you very much, Reverend Liz. I think I'm blown away. My heart is beating with, we've got to get out of there. You know, we got to get out there. In the session that follows this one, we're going to talk more about what role should WILPF be playing in the movement. How do we lift the voices of women from the bottom? What role can those of us who are more privileged play in a movement like this? And if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat. Rowan, are you monitoring them, or is somebody monitoring them?
I am. I'm monitoring them. We
Rowan?
have only one question so far from Ellen Barfield about the For the People Act. She's concerned that the For the People Act makes it harder for alternative parties to be able to get on the ballot, and thus she feels that's a serious defect for those of us who might be in third parties or trying to make real change, and wondered if the Poor People's Campaign had any comments on that.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to kind of look at the specific legislative acts that are there. There's some really important parts of the For the People Act, and it is in no way perfect. It includes, taking dark money out of politics. It includes making sure that we're expanding voting rights. It includes making sure that folks can get registered and able to vote no matter what party they're in. It makes sure that you can still have extended voting, but again, people are continuing to have to organize both to push this forward and to put so much more, because right now, indeed, our voting rights are majorly under attack. There are limitations, but it does not make it right now. In terms of some of the it puts the power more in the hands of the people, in the voice of the people. And when the people have more of a voice, that's when independent politics are able to be more powerful. And so while in no ways is a perfect act, and surely there are ways to improve it. At this point, the Poor People's Campaign has talked about needing to get dark money out of politics, needing to expand and protect voting rights, and needing to be able to connect our democracy with economic justice and all issues that are about, radically redistributing economic and political power in the country and in the world.
And we have a question from Robin Lloyd. I'm not a poor person. How do I join the Poor People's Campaign?
So this is a great question, because part of the reason I quote Dr. King quite a bit is that he often will also remind people that he himself was not someone who was directly impacted by poverty, and I think that there's many ways that we are impacted, right? Again, if we live in a society where half of it, and then when you start to look at the world, the vast majority of it is living in poverty, we all are impacted by it. And yet we are called, however we're impacted, to come together and keep on making a contribution. So what's more important to me and to a movement is, are you waking up every day saying, how do I build a transformative society where everybody has all the rights and all of the dignity that we deserve? A favorite quote of mine from Dr. King is the dispossessed of this nation live in a cruelly unjust society. If they can be helped to take action together, they will do so with a freedom and a power that will be a new and unsettling force. So whether you're poor or you're not poor, you can have a role in building a movement. That means that folks that are doctors can bring their healthcare skills to the movement. That means that folks that are engineers can come up and spend their creative energies and their talents, designing the kind of society we need to live in. That means when folks, no matter what your circumstance is, you can bring it into a movement that says, it doesn't have to be this way. This is not as good as it gets. And so there are many folks that are poor in the Poor People's Campaign. There are many folks who are not poor, but who see that the arc of the universe is long and it must be bent towards justice. And we can all use all that we have at our disposal to be able to help take action to make these injustices in the clear in front of people, and the solutions to be made. And so again, we're not looking for more people to be poor. We don't need folks to take a vow of poverty to be a part and a leader in this campaign. And yet it is also important to recognize the moral and political agency of those that are most impacted, coming together with people from all walks of life, including people with wealth and a conscience, to be able to actually build a big enough, a more powerful enough, movement, a campaign that can actually transform things.
Thank you. And I always tell people who ask me that, you're affected by ecological devastation. I don't care how rich you are. So Cheryl Spencer asks to explain the concept of the third Reconstruction and the resolution introduced by Barbara Lee about this concept.
Great. So the Poor People's Campaign is put forward that we're in an era where a third Reconstruction is being built. The first Reconstruction was right after the Civil War, when leaders across, especially the U.S. South, former slaves, white sharecroppers, pastors and moral leaders and other people came together to build the kind of biggest democratic project that this nation has ever seen since its founding. Instilled in the North Carolina Constitution, I know we have folks from North Carolina here this evening, are back in the 1860s is the rights of women, the rights for public education. I mean, the unbelievable, beautiful, progressive rights and kind of dignities inscribed into state constitutions all across, especially the U.S. South. Reconstruction was this amazing promise of what it could be to have folks, especially when poor people across race and geography are able to help construct what society could look like. And of course, it was stamped out by a redemption movement that found it very threatening to have poor white people and poor Black people coming together and building such powerful strength from the bottom. So as the first Reconstruction is defeated, and what is introduced is Jim Crow and other forms of de facto and de jure segregation. Then a second Reconstruction movement, that is the Black freedom struggles of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 40s, the civil rights movement is kind of a second Reconstruction, another attempt in history of people coming together across this division in order to help realize, the promise that had not yet been realized. Things like the Poor People's Campaign and a fusion movement of poor people coming together is this another attempt. And yet what we see, what happens, with the assassination of King, with the assassination of Fred Hampton, with so much of the rollback that happens in the late 60s into 70s and 80s, is kind of, again, needing now, calling forth a third Reconstruction that is gaining some steam, and that is, let's look at the power and the potential of pulling people again into a Reconstruction movement that really is that. It's about reconstructing society from the bottom up. It's about what happens in our political landscape when poor people come together across these lines that have historically divided us and put forward an agenda, independent political agenda that has the needs and demands of the poor first and foremost. And so that's what we kind of are talking about when we say a third Reconstruction. And this past spring, Barbara Lee from the kind of poverty and opportunity kind of caucus in the House of Representatives, and Pramila Jayapal, the chair of the Progressive Caucus, together with dozens of some of the most diverse representatives from all across the country, introduced a resolution. Now, it's a resolution. It's not legislation that is about passing laws right this minute, because it's about building up the resolve of our lawmakers and the resolve of the people in the nation to actually address these issues. So they introduced this resolution. It's called Third Reconstruction, Fully Addressing Poverty and Low Wages from the Bottom Up. It's a resolution, so it includes, pages of kind of really detailing the levels of injustice and the intersection of the 5 injustices that the Poor People's Campaign thinks that we have to address altogether in order to actually build such a Reconstruction movement. So it's systemic racism and poverty, ecological devastation, militarism and this war economy, and this false moral narrative of religious nationalism. And so it details where things are with those issues, how the pandemic has made things worse, how this attack on democracy is making things worse. But it's and then it puts out the kinds of policies, the type of legislation that is needed, the agenda that really has come out of the cries and the organizing of people that are impacted by these injustices, and suggests the level of military cuts that we need, the level of funding for education that we need, the guarantee of housing and healthcare, and really puts forward a pretty big kind of almost omnibus vision for what it would take. And then it shows that we have the resources and we actually know how to do it. And it would require a fair taxation system. It would require defunding the military and putting that investment in social programs and other economic programs. And it would involve, basically making an investment, including deficit spending that, into things like living wage jobs and healthcare and the kinds of things that actually everybody needs. And then seeing how our society can afford that and actually can't afford not to do it. And so if people are interested, there is, you can find the resolution online. I think it's pretty inspiring that a bunch of congressional representatives have listened to the cries and the demands of poor people and have put forward something that is really different than anything that's been put forward kind of in Congress like this before. And so we're still trying to push more folks to take it up and sign on to it, and keep on organizing.
So we have an ecological devastation question from Randa Solik. How can we best connect the PPC to what needs to be done for our dire climate emergency?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when we look back at what Dr. King was talking about, what the welfare rights movement of the 60s and others that were a part of the 68 campaign, there were these triple evils, right, of poverty and racism and militarism. But as we started to build this campaign, 50 years later, we couldn't go to poor communities and not take up the issue of ecological devastation and the climate crisis. Who's being hurt first and worst, although indeed, Rowan, everyone is impacted by the destruction of the planet and everything in and on it, are poor and marginalized communities. And because of that, it came out of that organizing, that what's been central to it is making sure that we have environmental justice, very central in all of it. If people are interested, I mean, there are a set of the kind of demands and agenda of the campaign that speak to, what people that have been doing the work with alongside us, and in this work around climate. But we never kind of separate, one of these issues out. But again, it's everything from, banning mountaintop removal and fracking, and taking and making the fossil fuel industry and other polluters to pay for not just cleanup, but to actually invest in the kind of work that needs to happen. It's everything from if we're going to talk about a jobs program, it's about climate resilience. It's about green economy and jobs. So there's a whole host of different parts of our agenda that are informed by the grassroots organizations that are leading around the impact of climate change. Because again, it's so many poor communities, marginalized communities that have been in this battle and have seen the code red before reports are coming out, because again, people's water is poisoned. Tropical diseases are flaring up because of climate change. There are climate refugees. I mean, all of that are the people that are in the 140 million. So again, there's a lot of different kind of environmental planks to the larger agenda of the campaign, and we see that that all of it has to be kind of done together.
Wonderful, thanks. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I have one last question. Given the chronic shortage of affordable housing and an ongoing failure to significantly ramp up new construction, in California, we seem doomed to grapple with obscene levels of homelessness. But this is not just a California problem, it's nationwide. How is the campaign addressing homelessness and the unhoused?
Yeah, so I myself come out of organizing amongst welfare rights leaders, but also the homeless. And I was actually homeless for a time myself. So the kind of plight of homelessness and the powerful organizing around housing and ending homelessness is really central, not just to me, but to the whole campaign. You know, again, the issue around housing and housing justice is that it's not that we don't have a resolution to this problem. I mean, in California, for instance, if we're going to talk about it there are 5 empty houses for every homeless person, right? And so, or housing units, but not in bad repair. It's like, so it's clearly an issue of distribution. It's clearly an issue of structure, because it's not that there's not enough housing. It's that that our society is built on making too much money off of housing and evicting people, and not on ensuring that everyone has the rights that everyone deserves. And so again, in our agenda and in the grassroots organizing work, you know, there's a pretty full and comprehensive, you know, housing solutions that is everything from showing this kind of disparity and saying, well, you know, part of the solution is, you know, housing people in the housing that's available, and making sure that we, you know, don't just end evictions in the midst of a pandemic, but if we can do it in a pandemic, it means that we can halt all evictions forever. Like, we never need to evict people again. And if you're going to be worried about landlords, it's only a very small percentage of smaller landlords that can't really handle that. And so have programs that bail those smaller landlords out, but mostly bail the people out, because again, there are real solutions to the housing crisis. You know, so it's everything from real affordable housing to, you know, homelessness prevention to ensuring the right and guarantee of housing for all. And so, you know, again, there's some more specifics in the program if people are interested. And all of that information is on the Poor People's Campaign website. It's on the Kairos Center website. But indeed, this issue of homelessness, I think, really kind of sums up the immorality of a system, both that has more, you know, empty housing units than homeless people, and yet people to the tune of thousands of people die every year because they don't have housing. I think it sums up that we don't have the political will to change it when you can build a prefab house in 45 minutes, and yet, you know, right now we have, you know, the average age of people that are homeless is 9 years old. It shows the contradictions and why we need a movement, but a movement that sees the connection between all of these issues. You know, whether it's wages and welfare and healthcare and water and education and good jobs and a clean air and clean water, and all of it's possible. And so let's never accept this idea that we can't do it, because we can, and we can do it in a sustainable way for the whole world, and not just for this insane and wealthy country.
Thank you so much, Reverend Liz. You've given us so much to think about, and I hope people will stick